By the end of this video, you will understand why the most damaging thing George Clooney ever said about Donald Trump was not said in anger, not said at a protest, not said at a fundraiser or a press conference, or a carefully prepared political statement. It was said in the flat, almost affectionate register of a man describing someone he used to know well, in the specific, personal, documented register of a friend who watched a friend become something unrecognizable and found, in the watching, the most precise and irreplaceable credential for describing what the transformation produced. He said, "I knew him very well. He used to call me a lot." He said it to Variety in December 2025, in the unhurried voice of someone who is not performing the distance from the subject but simply reporting it. A biographical fact, a documented history, a friendship that existed and then became something that friendship cannot contain. That sentence, "I knew him very well," is the setup flip. It flips every subsequent statement from celebrity opinion into personal testimony. It transforms the war crime accusation, the acting skills rebuttal, the cocktail waitress description, the somber tone of April 2026 into something none of them could be without the prefix of actual, documented familiarity. You cannot dismiss personal testimony the way you can dismiss political opinion. You cannot call it partisan when the person delivering it begins with, "I knew him very well. He used to call me a lot." Trump called Clooney's acting skills into question in October 2025, when Clooney appeared on 60 Minutes and discussed the president's attacks on the media, not naming Trump, addressing the pattern in the specific, careful register of a man who has decided that the subject is the institution and not the man, because the institution outlasts the man, and the institution is what requires defending. Trump posted the following morning. He said Clooney was a not very talented actor. He said Hollywood liberals always protect each other. He said Clooney was finished. He said the movies were terrible. He said it about a man whose most recent production had generated an Oscar nomination. He said it in the all capitals residence register. And Clooney, who had been on the receiving end of the Trump attack vocabulary since 2016, who had watched the same playlist of overrated and not talented and finished and Hollywood elite deploy against Meryl Streep and Robert De Niro and Samuel L. Jackson and Cher and every other person on the list, did something none of them had done in their initial responses to the same playlist. He went on Instagram the following day. He delivered a rebuttal to the White House's mockery of his acting skills, not in the performed anger of someone who has been wounded, not in the careful diplomatic register of someone who is aware of the professional risk, in the scorching, unhurried, completely confident register of a man who has 2 Academy Award nominations, a Cecil B. DeMille Award, and the specific personal knowledge that the man calling his talent into question used to call him frequently, tried to help him get into a hospital to see a back surgeon, and asked him at bars which cocktail waitress was single. That knowledge is the receipt, not a physical photo pulled from a folder in front of a studio audience. The documented, personal, first-hand record of who Trump was before he was performing the presidency. The specific, private Trump that Clooney knew well, that called him a lot, that showed up at bars with questions about waitresses. Placed in public, in the flat, almost fond voice of someone who is not describing an enemy, but a man he used to know, who has become something the knowing of him makes uniquely legible. The friendship has a documented timeline. It did not begin as adversarial. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Trump and Clooney occupied overlapping spaces in the specific geography of New York and Hollywood celebrity, where the entertainment world and the real estate world produced a shared social register. Events, venues, the particular circuit of a certain kind of public figure who appears at the same places in the same years and develops, through proximity and repetition, the specific familiarity of people who know each other without being close, who are friendly without being friends, and who share enough of the same world to have opinions about each other that are personal rather than abstract. Trump called Clooney during that period. The calls are documented in Clooney's own account, not adversarial calls, not political calls. Calls in the register of a man who collected famous people the way some people collect objects, who maintained a Rolodex of celebrity proximity and periodically activated it with a call that was simultaneously personal and promotional, that positioned the caller as a peer rather than a fan while doing the work of a fan. Clooney took the calls. He described Trump in the cocktail waitress passage, in the specific, wry, forensic voice of someone reporting a behavioral observation from a distance of 20 years, not with contempt, but with the flat accuracy of someone who has had enough time to understand what the observation reveals. He said, "He was the guy who came to the bars and asked me which cocktail waitress was single." He said it in the voice of someone describing a pattern they recognized at the time and have since watched replicate itself at a scale that makes the bar moment legible as a preview. He said, "I never thought someone so deeply flawed would actually reach the White House." He said it without performed outrage, without the escalation of someone who is discovering the flaw in real time. In the flat, almost resigned voice of a man who knew the flaw, documented it personally, and watched it arrive at an address he had not expected it to reach, and who has been, since January 2017, in the specific position of a witness whose testimony is more credible than most because the witness knew the subject before the subject became the subject. The distance between the bar and the Oval Office is the story. The cocktail waitress question and the war crime accusation are not two separate stories. They are the same story at different scales, the same behavioral grammar, the same specific pattern of a man who uses his position relative to the people around him, not to serve those people, but to extract from them what his position makes accessible. Whether the extraction is a phone number at a bar or a favorable interpretation of international law from a State Department that requires his approval to function. Clooney named the war crime in April 2026. Trump had threatened Iran in the specific, unqualified language of someone who had decided that the threat was the policy and that the consequence of the threat, the announced potential destruction of an entire civilization, a statement made to high school students at an event in Italy with the casual confidence of someone ordering from a menu, did not require the specific, careful, institutionally reviewed language that international law applies to statements of that kind. Clooney was at an event in Italy when the statement was made. He said, "If anyone says he wants to end a civilization, that's a war crime." He said it in the flat, forensic register of someone who has been watching the behavioral grammar since the bars of the 1990s and has arrived, through the specific, documented distance of 30 years of knowing the subject, at the finding that the grammar has always been pointing toward. Trump posted about Clooney's acting skills. He said the films were terrible. He said Clooney was a faded star. He did not address the war crime finding. He did not address the civilization statement, or the international law framework, or the specific documented language of what constitutes a war crime under the Geneva Convention and its subsequent protocols. He addressed the acting career and left the war crime finding in the record, in Italy, in the flat, forensic voice of a man who knew the subject at the bar stage and has been watching the grammar replicate upward through every available instrument of power for 30 years. The 60 Minutes appearance in October 2025 was the most institutionally significant moment of the public phase of the confrontation. Not because of what Clooney said, but because of what he did not say. He appeared on the most credible, most documented, most institutionally serious news magazine program in American television history. He discussed Trump's attacks on the media without naming Trump. He discussed the president's relationship with press freedom in the flat, precise, completely unnamed register of a man who has decided that the institution is more important than the confrontation, that naming the president in the specific format of a confrontation gives the confrontation the wrong shape, that the right shape is the institutional one, that the threat to journalism is larger than the specific man making it and requires the larger frame. Trump named him immediately. Trump gave the confrontation the shape it had declined to take. Personal, presidential, all capitals from the residents, and the shape Trump gave it confirmed, in public, exactly what Clooney had declined to confirm, that the attacks on the media were personal, were specific, and were being made by the man who called actors overrated and faded and not talented in the same register he used to call them on the phone from the bars of the 1990s. The December 2025 Variety interview is the receipt that the fabrication channels are trying to replicate with their 1990s photo title. No photo was produced. No studio went silent. What happened was a journalist asked Clooney about his history with Trump, and Clooney answered in the specific, documented personal register of someone who was there, who knew the man, who took the calls, who heard the waitress questions, who watched the behavioral grammar replicate from the bar to the boardroom to the ballot to the Oval Office to the Italy statement about ending a civilization, and who found, in the specific, documented distance between the bar and the war crime, the most precise and irreplaceable answer to every subsequent Trump post that called his acting overrated. He said, "I knew him very well. He used to call me a lot." That sentence does more work than any photo. It places Clooney inside the subject's documented history rather than outside it. It transforms every subsequent finding, the flawed man, the waitress question, the war crime, the civilization statement, from the external assessment of a critic into the internal testimony of a witness. It says, I am not describing someone I read about. I am describing someone who called me. And what I am describing is not a political opponent or a cultural adversary, but a man I knew well, who became something the knowing of him makes uniquely, personally, irreplaceably legible. Trump has not addressed the knowing him well sentence. He has not addressed the calls. He has not addressed the waitress question, or the back surgeon, or the 30-year documented distance between the bar and the war crime. He has posted about the acting career. He has called the films terrible, and the star faded and the talent absent. The confirmation is in the cross-reference. Every Trump post about Clooney placed against the specific, documented, personal statements Clooney has made, and the count of Trump posts that address any specific personal claim versus the count that address the acting career only. The ratio is the finding. The acting career is the subject Trump can engage. The bar, the calls, the waitress, the 30-year witness, the war crime named from Italy by someone who was at the bar when the grammar was first visible, those are the subjects Trump has not addressed. The distance between what was addressed and what was left standing in the record is not a photo pulled from a folder in a studio. It is a sentence delivered in December 2025 to a journalist at Variety, in the flat, almost fond, completely personal register of someone who knew him very well, and who has been paying the cost of that knowing and using it and placing it in the record since the bars of the 1990s made the grammar visible to anyone with the specific, documented credential of having been there. Subscribe and turn on every notification, because the man who knew him very well is not done talking, and what he says next will carry the weight of every year of the knowing behind it.